Good afternoon. Can you hear me back there? Yes. Wonderful. I am Chandra De Silva. I'm the Vice Provost for Faculty Development, and today I'm standing in for Provost Carol Simpson, who is still recovering from her flight back from somewhere last night. And it was a special privilege for me to be asked to introduce Bridget Anderson. Bridget came to Old Dominion University in 2005, and the university has never been the same ever since. She was one of our extraordinary teachers, and 3 years after she came here, she won the Virginia Outstanding Faculty Award, an award that at that time had been won by less than 20 of our teachers. She has since then been assisting us to help other people win the awards. So if more people have won the awards since then, that's also partly due to Bridget. Bridget Anderson has published a lot. I know she has a book, she has many articles, and they tell me that she's writing another book on Southern Mountain Speech. But that's not really all you should know about Bridget. She has taken the discipline of linguistics and applied it in ways that I would never have dreamed of. So what she may not tell you is that she is involved in some really practical speech recognition technique developments that have wide application outside the academic world, that for many years she has been teaching her undergraduates by helping them actually do research. So this topic that she's going to talk about is nothing new to her. Incorporating research into undergraduate teaching, it is in some ways also the incorporation of undergraduate teaching into research, because for Bridget, the two are very closely connected. But you've come to listen to Bridget and not to me. So what I'm going to do is to invite her to come and talk about today's topic, incorporating research into undergraduate teaching. But before I conclude, I need to thank the Center for Teaching and Learning, for Learning and Teaching, for sponsoring this set of events, because this is something I personally enjoy, and I'm sure that some of you will pick up something you can use by listening to Bridget. There you are, Bridget.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chandra, and thank you, Allison, for asking me to do this. I've been looking forward to it, and thank you to all of you for coming during one of the busiest parts of the whole semester. Believe me, I understand how busy everybody is. Let me make sure I've got my thing working. So, really, I was trained to work collaboratively with my students by my own mentors, starting from when I was in my undergraduate. I wrote a paper for a history of English class. My professor worked with me on it. He nominated it for the National Conference on Undergraduate Research. The Honors College paid for me to go, and that was the door that opened for me to become an academic. I would have never even thought about grad school. I came from a very small place in rural Appalachia. I didn't even know anybody that had gone to grad school. It just never occurred to me until my own teachers in undergrad encouraged me in my own research. And then for my master's degree, I worked with the person in my field of sociolinguistics who does more community-based collaborative research with students than anybody in the world, and that is Walt Wolfram at NC State. He involves students in every aspect of his community language studies, and he goes all over North Carolina, the Outer Banks, the mountains, doing both research and community outreach. So he was a great role model to all his students, and we all still do the same things in our own teaching. So that's us together last year when he got an award from the governor of North Carolina for his research being a form of community service. So, how to make this happen? I have learned a few tricks through the years. Everybody gets better at teaching with experience, and I am no exception. So, as I did this from year to year, I started noticing when things went smoothly and what made the difference in a semester going smoothly and a semester not going so smoothly. And one thing that I find to be really important is that from day one, we should foster a spirit of trust and teamwork. It's the relationship with the students that sets the stage for the entire rest of the semester. And I know that that sounds a little touchy-feely, but I cannot overemphasize the importance of that relationship. So students need to understand that we are all in an enterprise together. We are working towards some goal together on a team. And also, we need to clearly articulate why our research matters and link that up to the classes that we're teaching. Why does the knowledge production in our discipline matter? How does it impact lives? How does it impact circumstances? What are the applicational values of what we do? I get all that out on the table at the beginning of the semester because it makes a huge difference if students understand why they should care about what we care about. So I'm constantly stressing the relevance of the work that we do in my classes. And I make sure that students see the relevance of what we're doing to their own lives. Now, I'm in linguistics. That's the scientific study of language. So everyone has a natural interest in language. So in some ways, it's probably easier for me than it is for other people because everyone's interested in how people talk and what that means and social factors that influence language and different ways of doing things. So the material sells itself, and we all have to deal with language. Everybody is constantly navigating their social worlds through language. So it's very easy to help students see connections between what we're doing in class and their lives. And I structure my assignments in that direction as well, which I'll talk a little bit about later. I also make my expectations for student performance very clear. And if you have a higher level of trust with students, you can be more demanding. I am extremely demanding in my classes. I have like 7 pages single-spaced of course policies. I run a tight ship. I have very high expectations for their work. If they can get their projects by me, they can get it by anybody. My tests are comprehensive and thorough. I have extremely high expectations. But with a level of trust, they know they can come to me if they need help. They know that I'm there for them and that I am willing to do whatever it takes to help them reach the level of expectation that I have for them. So I say set the bar high and use your relationship to mentor them through that. So there is an important instructor component of the equation. My number one rule is don't see your teaching and research as being in competition with each other. That is a recipe for frustration. Really, I just don't believe in compartmentalizing everything so tightly. Integration is the best approach. And if you see your students as being on the same team as you and assisting you and working with you in your goals for your research, it totally changes the way that you view teaching. It's important to find links between your research and the courses you teach, and there are always links. There are always links, or you wouldn't be, we're not assigned what we teach randomly. There's always some sort of link between your teaching and your research. And then go beyond that, and this is the sweet spot. what kind of projects can actually be done better in collaboration with students. That means you are stepping out beyond what you could do by yourself or with your colleagues or your peer group of other professors. What could you actually be more effective doing with your students? And then you have to train your students in research methods. You just have to commit to doing that. That is really important, is working with them to make sure that they understand what you expect for them. You can't just give them a big research project and then throw them out there by themselves to do it. You really have to commit to training them in methods. And I say do not water down your methods for your students. Sometimes I see people doing sort of linguistics light with their students, like, oh, this is too hard for students, so let me water it down just a little bit. Not here, by the way, not here. But I say do not, I'm thinking of like phonetics. Acoustic phonetics is one of the things I do, and sometimes people will say, oh, this is too hard, let's just give them a baby version. I say, no, do not do that. They will rise to the occasion. You can train them to use the methods that are up to your disciplinary standard. Do not water it down. They will not disappoint you if you take the time to teach them. And I advocate using a mentor approach to classroom leadership, being sort of like a coach. So one class that I regularly teach, I teach it every fall, is called American English. And this is a class that is really amenable to doing research with students. And you'll see from the course description why. When people think of American English, they usually think of a standard language. But in my class, we actually examine the ways in which English is actually spoken. And there's a whole lot more ways to speak than just standardly. We examine models for collecting, describing, and analyzing variation for American English. And I make sure my students learn tools that they can apply outside my classroom and beyond the time we spend together that semester. And I always stress who the course is important for. And this part is easy for me because I actually think that every citizen needs to take a similar class. Everybody. Because there's so much misinformation in the world about the nature of language. And it's institutionalized. So the first couple of classes are fun because students are really surprised if they've had no prior linguistic training. They're really surprised that most of what they've learned about language up until this point has been incorrect, is wrong, that they have to unlearn the misinformation that they have been taught, and that is upheld in some of our institutions. This is always really shocking to students. I mean, you can just see it on their faces during the first couple of classes. They are just so surprised that, in fact, there is not a correct and an incorrect way to speak. And by the way, that's layperson language. You got to leave your layperson language ways behind. There's no more correct and incorrect when it comes to spoken language in my class. But they're always just so surprised. And then when I demonstrate to them how this impacts lives, like for example, life is hard enough without a person feeling insecure because of the way that they speak and all those stances, which we call prescriptivism, being based on misinformation. Life is hard enough as it is. This damages people's self-esteem. It limits what some people think they are able to achieve. It causes people to turn off from school in some cases. This stuff matters. My students are totally on board by the end of the first week of class. I also make sure that my students understand my teaching philosophy, which is always on my syllabi. So you can see it here, but the main point is that I try to communicate the relevance of what we are doing to the academic community and to society, and that I hope my students will choose to do the same. And I stress that we are all in a process of becoming together, that our time together will change all of us, including me, and that we can use the skills that we get together to make contributions after our time together is over. And I have a statement of purpose. It's a more humane, just world through linguistic awareness and linguistic research, and when it comes to language, linguists do it better. And I realize that other people in language-related disciplines might take offense at that, but that is just too bad, because I do believe that linguists do it better, because we are the scientists of language, and, well, obviously I'm biased, but this is what I sell to my students and what I'll try to sell to you as well. So the assignments in the class are all interconnected. They complete a language notebook, which is sort of like a journal, and a reflective essay, and I let them do both introspective entries in the journal, but I also give them ideas for experiments they can do out in the world. Anything we talk about in class, I will give them ideas for observations out in the world. And I always say, this is not a command, you don't have to do this, take it or leave it. So for example, if we're talking about the differences, the stylistic differences between creaky voice, which is, you know, creaky voice, it's been in the news, it's considered hip and cool, more women are doing it, and breathy voice, like Marilyn Monroe, I'll have them go out in the world and actually observe creaky voice and breathy voice if they want to. I'll always throw out a whole bunch of suggestions every single class that they can take me up on or not. But this is a way that they can actually see what we're doing out in the world. And it's also a place where they can reflect on what they're learning and how it's affecting them. So sometimes they may want to write about the misinformation that they've always learned and how it's a struggle to give up these old ways of thinking and linguistic snobbery and things like that. So that's a great tool, and students like that assignment. I also train them how to do field work. That means I do, in fact, unleash them on the world. This is huge. I train them how to be good ethnographers, and the secret of ethnography is to discover rather than impose. I train them to collect archival quality oral histories in the field, which means that they have to learn the appropriate recording conditions for field work. They have to learn how to ask questions and be a good listener and keep the conversation going. They get to decide who they interview. And we talk about how to find someone to interview and things like that. And then they transcribe the oral history, which every linguist needs to know how to do two things. Well, more than two things, but it all starts with field work and transcription. So they are being brought into the fold and given some skills that every linguist has to have. And transcribing is not easy. You think, oh, just putting in the computer what the conversation is. Oh no, it's counting up the milliseconds of the pauses. It's getting every single and You will learn so much about conversation in American English by strapping on those headphones and doing the work of a transcript. And my students transcribe about 45 minutes of speech, which takes them supposedly between 15 and 20 hours to do. This is a huge assignment. And then they also do a course project, and we have a comprehensive, detail-oriented exam. So I make sure they have their facts straight. I think of it as an American English certification test. They've got their facts straight, and they know how to apply what they're doing in the world, and they know how to do linguistic research. So we archive the oral histories and community narratives for the purposes of research, and we also share our work with the communities. So and then for the course project, one of the options is to do linguistic analysis. They could do service learning if they want. I always give choices. That's another thing that I find works very well. Then you're not too heavy-handed. It also aids in being really demanding, because if students have some choices as to what they do, then they can better align their own interest with your class. So analysis is one choice. Service learning, which is also research-based, is another choice. My students do a lot of service learning and community outreach, and this is actually very important. This has a big social impact. Raising awareness of the nature and function of linguistic diversity. This is really one of the major social issues of our time, I think, because so many people think that whole groups of people do not even have language. And that is absolutely not true. And it's really pitiful, all the misinformation there is circulating out in the world. So my students come up with all sorts of ideas to raise awareness. Everything from ad campaigns to t-shirts to children's books to letters to the editors to pilot documentaries. It's amazing the ideas that they come up with. Okay, so one example of a project that we're working on, and we have been working on for a couple of years, is the Cape Charles Rosenwald School Oral History Project. And this community group approached me a couple of years ago and asked if my students would be willing to work with them to collect some oral histories. This was an African American school over on the Eastern Shore, and Jess was an undergraduate at the time. She's in our master's program now, but she was an undergrad at the time. So she was in my American English class that semester. I made it an option for the whole American English class. Jess was my fieldwork coordinator. She also did, that's a huge job, fieldwork coordinator. That is like harder than herding cats. You're like arranging all these interviews, making sure students get all the way over to the Eastern Shore, getting the archival copies to the Eastern Shore, checking over the transcripts. This is like a huge job. And Jess did it in class and as my intern as well. And I just loved it that they came to us and wanted to partner with us on this. So we've been over there now almost 2 years collecting oral histories with people that went to the school and people that worked in the school. So this is a picture. They had I know it's kind of dark, but they had a dinner. They have a dinner every October to just sort of get together and celebrate the project and sort of, fellowship with each other. And so this is Jess and me and some participants and one of my graduate students at the time. And that's me and Jess at graduation. That was last spring. So another thing that was fun for my students to do is the pilot did an article on Tidewater Voices back in 2009, and it came out, it's online now, but it came out in the print edition of the paper as well. And Denise Watson was so great because when she approached me to do this, she did not ask to interview me alone. She called me up on the phone and she said, we want to talk to you and some of your students who are working on this project. I mean, that's how she approached it, which I really loved. So we booked a conference room in the English department. I had undergraduates and graduate students there, and that's how she got the material for her piece. And that was a lot of fun. My students really enjoyed that. So that was a few years ago. So I'll have the link for that in my presentation online. There is an unpredictable aspect to it, though. You never know what students are going to say. So the funny thing that happened when she was interviewing us is she asked, what are the best recording conditions? And this was a case where I had trained my students too well. She said, what are the best recording conditions in the field? Well, when I was teaching how to do recordings in homes, I always sort of start out with a joke, but it's not really a joke. I say, you've got to have lots of soft things around. You don't want hard floors. You don't want hard tables. You want lots of pillows and fluffy things. So I always say, now I know this is probably not going to be possible, but if you are interviewing like your mom or your dad or your cousin, someone the bedroom really is the best place to do the interview. But only if it's somebody that you know and would understand. And so I'm very careful about the way I teach it in class, but my students pay attention, they learn, and I was mortified when Denise Watson asked this question, and one of my students, before I even had a chance to exhale, my student said, the bedroom. The bedroom is the best place to do recordings. Lots of pillows and fluffy things, best acoustic conditions, and I immediately jumped in and said, that's only if it's somebody in our family that we really know well. But she actually put this in the article without the disclaimer about it being your family. So I actually had messages on my office phone at 8 ODU. I would love to be recorded in my bedroom. You just never know. So one exciting thing that happened is an undergraduate student in my American English class for his course project asked if he could start a Tidewater Voices documentary with his fieldwork, a pilot version of a documentary. And this is too big of a project just for a single semester. But he started, and he made a lot of progress in American English. And then I did an internship with him the next semester, because that's one thing I do that allows me to do even more research with students, is I have a robust internship program. So if the students and I have a joint interest and there's something we can work on together, I'm always willing to do an internship. And it's win-win. Now, it is work for the faculty member to do an internship, because you've got to train the student. And then, but then they're going to work 100 hours on something that is near and dear to your heart. So you got to give a lot, but you get a lot. And this is the perfect example of how that can work out. So he applied for an Honors College undergraduate research grant. He got it. He did the pilot of the documentary. It's about 23 minutes long, and it was screened at the ODU Undergraduate Research Conference. It shows you how we do our field work, because you can, I mean, usually we just audio record, but he was audio recording and video recording. So video recording is not sufficient if you're going to end up doing linguistic analysis, because the sound is not as good in video recorders as they are in audio recorders. So he actually had to be running an audio recorder and a video recorder. Another great thing about this project is that American English is a split level class. That means a 400 or 500 level class. He teamed up with a graduate student in the class that worked with him on that. And that often happens. I often have undergraduates and graduate students working together, and that always makes me happy. And I run my 400 level classes basically like graduate classes anyway. So the closer we can all work together and mentor each other, the better. So the narrator is the graduate student, and Tyler, the creator of this, and is the interviewer, is the undergraduate student.
Can you tell us, how do you handle IRB, human subjects, when you're doing all these student research?
I applied for my IRB approval as soon as I got here, because I knew that we were going to be launching this research project immediately. So actually my project was exempted.
But that includes all of the studies that all of your students are doing?
It all falls under the auspices of Tidewater Voices, a community language and oral history project.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then don't all of your students, whenever they engage in research, have to do the city training, and you have to amend that and add them to it and all that stuff? Or no?
Not when you're exempted. Now, if students go on and end up doing a dissertation that's related, they go through their own IRB approval, and every few years we sit down and do the thing on the web where you click, 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 click for 3 hours and get certified. And
okay, but only dissertation level, so your undergraduates don't do that?
They fall under the exemption. Yeah, and you know, at every other university I've been at, it was not exempted. You had to go through, you had to get like IRB approval. So I was really surprised that we fit the criteria for exemption, but we did. It's perceived as non-threatening, non-invasive, oral histories. But yeah, we have an exemption, a big umbrella. Not just in Tidewater, but we occasionally go outside Tidewater, like Tangier, to work with people who speak other relevant varieties, and that's always fun. My students have done too many different projects to list, but just a sampling before we move into the question answer. In addition to community language-based research, which so many of them have done, I've also had students do things like, I had a project with the Secret Service for 3 years, developing a voice recognition project, and I had an undergraduate who did an internship with me so that he could work with us on the project. He had to get security clearance and all that, but he was involved in every single aspect, the teleconference calls, the development of the technology, the working with the MIT speech scientists to implement it to implement the linguistic features into the system. That was a lot of fun, to actually bring a student into the forensic work that I do. We've worked with all kinds of different ethnic groups. I had an intern that worked with the Cherokee to do an oral history project with them. Just all kinds of different stuff. And so what I would like to leave you with is that if you collaborate with your students and work closely with them, it will enrich your life in ways that you never imagined. Honestly, it is so rewarding. You have to give a lot, but you get so much in return. It just makes everything more fun. And sometimes it seems like we're just drops in a bucket, and especially in the kind of outreach and awareness raising that my students and I do and that other sociolinguists do, it really is fighting an uphill battle. These language ideologies are so entrenched. It's like an uphill battle. So working with students, I have found, is really good to help with keep your energy up, keep your spirits up, and just makes everything more fun. So that is about it. I just want to mention Dean Metzger from the Honors College, because he's been such a partner in so many of our projects. My own mentors, my hardworking, dedicated students, and Denise Watson at the Virginia Pilot. And that is my current American English class, and they just turned in their transcripts and the oral histories they collected. So I have a big pile of them in my office waiting on me right now. So thank you so much for coming.
If you have any questions? Well, thank you, Bridget. Please.
Okay. I'll ask a question. I probably have 3 questions. You said early on, I don't know if this is on, you said early on that you set the bar high in your class, but I would like to know what you mean by that. I mean, it needs some qualification, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in this particular class, they take a comprehensive exam that I'm sure any of them could testify to, covers every single thing we do. It is absolutely thorough and comprehensive. Thorough. I see it as like a certification test. It's what I feel everybody needs to know. They have to use the same standards for their field work that I would have to use to get a peer-reviewed journal article accepted. They have to use a transcription system. They have to learn the system. It's the MyCase system that was developed at University of Michigan. So in all aspects of their work, they're having to conform to disciplinary standards. But part of what I'm talking about is qualitative. It's what I have in mind, the level of excellence that I have in mind, the level of thinking, the level of sophistication. I want my students to be able to go toe-to-toe with students anywhere in the nation. And I'm very competitive. I actually would want them to do better work than students at Stanford or Berkeley or Michigan or wherever. So I'm super competitive, and I'm known in the field myself as being very particular about methods. Like, I am the one who is super particular about methods, and not everybody is. So I have that same expectation, for better or for worse, for my students. It's all about the methods, the quality of the methods. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
Wait. I'm bringing you the mic.
I have 2 questions, and one is just a matter of curiosity. We know that this is a very diverse area, and all of these dialects are coming together. The African American, Native American, and the Tidewater dialect. What happens when they come together? Do you get sort of a synthesis, or do people tend to still hang on to their ways of speaking? I'm just curious about when they get together, what happens?
That is such a great question. As long as we have different cultures, we're always going to have different dialects, because dialects are just a reflection of social differentiation. So we still have a lot of distinctive cultures in this region, which means we have a lot of distinctive dialects. But people change each other too, and language contact has outcomes. So it really just depends on whether we're talking about a rural area or a city area, and what kind of cross-cultural communication is going on. Like, are people actually working and living with people that are different than them? And even if we do have extensive language contact, we can still have linguistic differentiation, and often do, because it can actually fuel differentiation. You know, people have their groups and they want to present as if they're from somewhere and belong to somebody. And so it really depends on the schema in the speaker's mind, because other speakers really want to orient to a cosmopolitan way of speaking, or perhaps they're working with the military or getting ready to move all over the country, and they may not want to sound like they're from a particular place or representing a particular group. So it really depends on speaker orientation, but we still have a whole lot of different cultures here, so we have a whole lot of different dialects here. That's such a great question.
Thank you. And if I could just ask one more, as you know, my son has a master's in applied linguistics and now teaches abroad in Turkey, and I'm wondering about what your students go on to do. Do they come back to you and tell you what kinds of jobs they've gotten and whether or not they're able to use the kinds of things that they've learned from you?
That's another really good question. So I really form a close relationship to my students. They get my cell phone number on my syllabus. I have no problem with them using it. They text me, they call me. I encourage them to stay in touch after they finish the class, after they graduate. I accept their Facebook friend request, and we're not going to get into the debate here about why that's a good idea or not. I understand that I have, you know, a constituency, and my audience is diverse. Everything from my rural Appalachian kin to my students to my linguistic colleagues. But I keep connected with my students, and some of my students go on to get PhDs in linguistics and become professors. Other students combine linguistics with something else that they do, like teaching, or I have one student that went into library science, but who still uses her linguistic training in library science. So I have a lot of interdisciplinary work. But I always tell my students to keep me posted on what they're doing. And I do have a lot of students that do what Aaron did, even though he was sadly never my student, who go abroad and teach English and get the TESOL training to teach English abroad. But I always tell students to keep in touch with me, let me know what they're doing, and to get in touch with me if they have trouble finding work. I am committed to mentoring them until they get a job. And so far, everybody that's kept in touch with me has gotten gainful employment, and that is really important to me.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I just ask something out of curiosity?
Sure.
You mentioned the ums. What does it mean when you when you speak?
When people say that's a discourse marker, and it can mean different things. It can mean you're gathering your thoughts or continuing the conversation. It can vary culturally, so that's not one of the things I specialize in. Joanne Scheibman could probably tell you a whole lot more about but it is important to note that it has a purpose. It does have a meaning. People use it to accomplish things in their speech.
And finally, do you spend time with your students on linguistic discrimination?
Oh gosh, that is built into almost everything that we do. They're very passionate about combating linguistic discrimination, and it's heartening to know that they're out there doing that. I do not pressure them, because it's socially awkward to always be that person that steps forward when you're surrounded by a bunch of language snobs, which it's so prevalent out there in the world. It can be very socially awkward to tell your mom or your dad that what they believe about language is not in fact true and not okay. It can be very face-threatening to combat language discrimination, but they are constantly coming to class with their tales of dealing with language discrimination in their own lives and also through their service learning. So a lot of the service learning projects are meant to raise awareness of the function and nature of linguistic diversity. That's one of the things that hooks them. Students do not like injustice. That's a great hook at the beginning of class.
Coming at you.
Thank you. So in your fieldwork, do you use any, for example, technologies like voice recognition, for example, like what Google is developing, for voice recognition algorithm? In general, do you use any technologies in your fieldwork?
Well, in our fieldwork so far, we've just done video and audio recording, and most of our interviews are just audio recorded. Some of them are also video recorded. And I consider my work in voice recognition to be part of my applied work. So I'm not really using it in my field work at all. Instead, I'm using it to help make voice recognition systems more sensitive to stigmatized, non-standard vernacular varieties. And the main project that I worked on in that regard is with the Secret Service with their voice recognition system. And I also do forensic linguistic casework in which I do acoustic analysis to solve crimes for which we have voice data. So like, for example, if somebody calls in a bomb threat, I can compare the acoustic characteristics of the 911 bomb threat calls with an interview with the suspect and determine whether or not these two voices match. So that's something different than the community language studies that we do. But on the other hand, it's my work in communities that helps me learn about the range of linguistic diversity that there is. So I can't say that they're not related, because when you do field work and you study real language data, you see that diversity in language and variation is the rule, not the exception. And we need our technology to be able to deal with that, so that we're not all having to repeat into Siri like I do, five. When Siri says, you say 5, and Siri says, say it again. I do not understand your accent. Or even worse, can you text me that command? So we are trying to work on that. Well, thank you all for coming.